So I invite all the presenters plus one additional colleague. Not that I want to get rid of you, but we're overrunning. So if any of you want to go to the Brain Energizer session with Mr. Victor Schiller from Ascent, and this is the last one he's running, and you want your brains recharged this morning, 10:25 in Tegel Room. Okay, additionally we have Anders Edvardsen of Circle K. So maybe as you didn't get a chance to talk, we'll go first question to you. Maybe in a few minutes you could summarize what are your experiences in Circle K with the payments industry, and is it going well, and what do you want from the industry going forward, and what is it that we're not providing you?
My name is Anders Edvardsen. As you said, come from Circle K, so I'm responsible for payment development in Circle K Europe. So just 1 minute about our organization, since I'm not sure everyone here knows us. But we're the leading, one of the leading fuel retailers across the Nordics and the Baltics, and also Ireland and Russia and Poland we have presence. So operate a B2B fuel card scheme, closed loop, with a lot of cards out there. We do private labeling, or co-branded private label cards, and so on.
Is the industry killing you with complexity, managing all of these countries?
I think it's, of course, innovation and disruption is always welcome. And we see there's a lot of things going on. I think the key for getting adoption is, on one side, getting it easy, doing it easy for the merchants to implement, meaning standardization. And also on the consumer side, it needs to create value, and it needs to be seamless, it needs to be frictionless, not just the payment experience in itself, but the entire life cycles, going from how you manage your credentials across devices, how you ensure that it's easy and cost efficient to implement that POS, hiding the complexity behind the scenes, creating rail agnostic solutions, so whatever the transaction goes, is it a SEPA transaction, is it a MasterCard or Visa, doesn't really care at the front end, so what happens behind should be hidden for the merchant. And then also keeping an eye on the entire customer journey. How can you improve the customer communication, both pre and post purchase, so meaning getting more instant communication and loyalty updates and so on. And
more mobile app and more interaction with the customer on the mobile?
Well, I think mobile is one thing, but I think we're moving towards a more connected world where mobile is just a device, and then you will get different devices. You will get cars communicating that we need to identify the owners of, and so on. So mobile is one thing, but it's going to be a connected world, and I think that will require some new type of partnerships across industries.
Do you want to kill cash?
I think that's cash is almost being killed already in some parts of Scandinavia, at least, and in the Nordics. So, and I think there's a lot of economies now leapfrogging the cash to card and going over to mobile, and I think also driven by, as Ercan discussed, also real-time payments infrastructures and the connected devices to that.
And the last quick question, I mean, do you see payments really as such a commodity? You just want it seamless, simple, easy, and virtually free?
I think it's hard to measure that in cash or in the pure cost, because you have a implementation cost, and creating this seamless experience, invisible payments and so on, of course, will drive the cost of implementation, probably. But I do believe that the cost of the transaction, of the processing side, will be lower and close to zero, hopefully.
And then following from that, I mean, Ercan, you said, separate instant payments, and you make the suggestion that since it's an account transfer, it's going to be, if you implement it so that it's easy for the consumer, it should be virtually free. Where is someone going to make any money in the industry around instant payments? Because there are a lot of players on the list, the network providers, the acquirers, the banks.
Yeah, I mean, yes, for the consumer, it's really a transfer of money via his bank account, and And today in Germany, for example, there are some banks which are supporting SEPA instant payment transactions. So they have implemented this kind of new infrastructure and are connected with the EBA clearing system. That means with other banks in the SEPA area. And there are really several banks in the SEPA area. But today, there are banks which are providing this service to their customers for 12 euros for real-time payments, for a real-time transfer of money. And there are banks, they doesn't have a fee for this service, right? So this is the scenario today, and we are convinced that there will be that there will be a development of a cost reduction for the consumers, because there will be competition, right? And 12 euros against nothing is really, there's room for improvement, right? And
consumer's not going to want to pay for this,
right?
And the merchant's not going to want to pay more than for the lowest payment method that is commercially acceptable.
Right. And another point is that, of course, for example, the saving banks are trying to not to cannibalize their existing payment transactions, which are on a card-based infrastructure, right? So, and that's the reason why the financial sector doesn't support this development really. So there will be more, let's say, we will be very happy to have more support from the EU Commission, for example, bringing these real-time payments a little bit faster to the POS. So retailers really want this new kind of payment methods at POS, but also in the e-commerce world. So yeah, it really depends on the banks, on those players.
If I may, because I'm representing a bank now.
Okay.
And definitely a couple of years ago we launched, beginning of last year, the instant payment on all the segments of the channels, and I think probably we are one of the biggest or the biggest in Europe, because the EBA platform RT1 processed something like 12 million transactions last year, and now we process something of us 1.5 million. The point is the sustainability of that now, because when I'm sitting with my retailer customers and they are not willing to let their consumer pay at the cashier, because the experience they expect on instant payment on pricing side should be the same with cards, meaning the consumer are not going to pay, no? And even if you charge a few cents, this is not something very appealing for the merchants. On the other way around, they don't want to pay a lot of interchange scheme and margin fees on us. So I think there must be a sustainable scheme. Otherwise, you know, Roberto is an ICT guy. You know, he knows better than me how many capex you need to invest on the infrastructure. What we are doing in Italy, for example, is leveraging on this account-to-account experience that we launched with the wallet Jiffy, and we moved this infrastructure within the domestic scheme, Bancomat Pay. In Italy, you know that there is this big domestic scheme with more than 36 million cards. So we moved a technology which enabled the account-to-account payment. Instant payment will be the engine, but the experience is already instant because of the mechanism they set up. And we are going to run and to launch on big retailers, trying to use the same, let's say, scheme of the cards with the lower fees. No? So I'm sure that there will be pressure on margin, but at least you need a sustainable model. Otherwise, there will be somebody doing the investments and nobody paying for that. No? And what Ercan was saying is quite important, because the European Commission is pushing also these tips, no? You know, this new project. I mean, 1 year after we launched the EBA, they asked to implement tips. And it's important why? Because they will extend to the 4,000 banks in Europe within a couple of years with a legal framework, because what we have to experience on account-to-account transaction are all the processes beside that the international circuits already experienced, meaning dispute processes, fraud management, several, let's say, processes where we still don't have a lot of experience. We have to cope with the strong customer authentication experience, which is different from banks to banks. So there are several standard schemes that they have to be implemented, no? And I think we should push European Commission to set up one rule. So otherwise, you will have a rules in Germany, a standard in Germany, a standard in Italy, and it will be a mess. No, interoperability at the end, the customer experience is the key factor. No. And this is something we also deliver to Commission as feedback, and I think definitely is easier than build a European card scheme. As always, sometimes I listen. Doesn't need. We already have the technology, but should be sustainable with the standard and interoperability among Europe.
It's true. There's no free lunch. Someone has to pay. You know, whoever gets the benefit, someone has to cover the costs. Andreas, in terms of cash killers, I mean, have you seen anything in across the region that is interesting in terms of initiatives? I mean, one, and you know, to that question, do you think the drop in interchange fees in some of these markets would certainly drive up usage? Two, are the merchants in Russia not going mad about the never-ending increases in fees? And I mean, I think in Poland, the scheme for changing cash registers to online, which is forcing a big technological change, adding terminals on top of that and forcing terminal change, and also financing those by bank schemes and banks, is certainly increasing terminal usage. What else are countries doing that you've seen in your region?
I think the key thing is that the region is completely fragile because of the fragmented landscape, meaning that in every country, the regulator is trying to do something different, trying to offer something for the merchants, sometimes for the customers. It can be a taxation, it can be a regulation of how to influence the merchants to accept more cards. But unfortunately, in non-EU countries, there is nobody who could centralize that. So from our point of view, it could be either the customers showing more need or demand for that, or the merchants, as basically we can also say that the merchants were heavily fighting for an interchange regulation in the EU previously. So if this is happening in non-EU countries, this could lead to a common regulation, which is already happening in Serbia. So if you take the example of Serbia and other countries would follow that path, this means that the regulations will be similar to the European Union, then the whole landscape in Europe would be a bit more equal, and then more infrastructure and more developments could be taken over by that region as well, because then it would be more on one level, equal and simpler. And simple always means cheaper, and this is a huge barrier nowadays, that whatever the banks needs to develop, this is, and I'm also talking about the bank's point of view, if you have to fulfill the local regulations and your whole infrastructure, IT infrastructure is used for fulfilling the local regulations, then you don't have the time and the capacity and definitely not the money to develop something on top of that, which could make a unique change, and we are definitely would be really happy to reach what the Nordics reached already, but we are so far away, unfortunately, and that's why I'm saying that the first steps needs to be something that is already common in European Union, in those regions as well, and after that we can make the next steps, and don't get me wrong, I'm a huge fan of all these alternative payments, and I would be the first to pay with an Apple Pay or Google Pay, but unfortunately it's not present either in Austria, not in Hungary, or not talking about Kosovo, Albania, Belarus, and these exotic countries. Not yet, exactly, right. Exactly. But as long as this landscape is different, we can't do centrally something which is boosting that, and that's the key problem.
You also mentioned one of your slides things that you said examples, but are nuts. I mean, in Poland, we're lucky that the National Bank said that the higher banknotes are much better because it costs them less to manufacture. So you wonder why stop at 500 and not have 10,000, but also they did a 3-year cash analysis, and in Poland they analyzed the cash is much cheaper than cards. The good news is that no one cares what they think, and no one's actually going to take this report and actually implement an anti-card drive to get more cash into the economy. We had a few questions here. There's one question for you around PSD2 at the pump, and then maybe we'll get on to the questions around the tap and go.
It says, how does PSD2 impact pay at the pump?
Yeah.
I think that is one of the key question marks for us as well. So it will, one of the areas at least for industries or type of retailers that are dependent on reserving amounts pre-purchase. So meaning the gas industry and also travel industry will also face some challenges converting to account-to-account payments based on that. So we'll of course have to do some tricks to make sure that it's a good customer experience in that setting. Could be solved by prepaying and paying back after the transaction or things like that. But it remains to see. For now, at least contactless payments are working fine. So that's it.
Okay. In terms of wallets, I mean, any card from any country works in Milan, and any mobile wallet that's NFC enabled, all of those payment methods fine?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. We developed the project completely PCI compliance, as I said in the question, and we accept all the wallet on mobile phone as Apple Pay, Google Pay, and other wallets that virtualize the card on mobile phone, in which it's possible to virtualize the card on mobile phone. We don't have the numbers of the traditional user that use the credit card and the mobile phone virtualized cards, but we are waiting for the number in the next session. But we are consider that we are increasing the number of passengers that use also cards and mobile phones. Then many passengers in Milano use both, depending on what they have on the rest of the mobile phone or cards.
I asked the question before, what were the learnings from London? When I looked at your slides, one interesting thing was covering all of the mobility issues. So electric scooters, rides, bicycles, everything, parking. London has this problem that it's all completely dislocated. You're paying in one app, you're paying by phone, you're calling to pay for parking. Is that the major difference? You want to integrate the city and the area for all of these mobility products?
Yes, this is the aim of ATM and also the municipality to work on a mass project, a mobility as a service project, because we must remember that in this year, all the public transport companies are changing the skins, and then we must remember that in this period, we don't only transport commuters and travelers, but we also transport information and new methods of payment to our customers. And it's important as you travel your customers along from A to B. And we are working to develop an ecosystem in which you can pay everything with one wallet. It pays as you use. With bicycle, you can take a bicycle, or you can pay the car park or parking lots in streets, and also public transport. We're working on it. It's not easy to integrate and make clearing, define the clearing use between the stakeholders, for example, from ATM to the Italian State Railways and to the private company of public transport. But we are working on it, and in the next year we will we have released the ecosystem and the API and the web service and the technology that allows all the stakeholders to integrate different way to travel.
It's the way to go for convenience for the commuters. Yes, Which city's next? You've done all this work in Milan. Are you now going to export your learnings, and will the other cities happily say, great, we'll take your scheme because it works and it's proven?
I think we cannot disclose, but definitely we are at least 4 cities, and there is one big cities in the south of Italy. So I mean, you can imagine there is not a lot of choices. What I want to add to what Roberto said is that I think this kind of infrastructure can enable also all the tourism initiatives. No? Also creating dedicated, customer experience to particular, let's say, corridor of tourists. Thinking about Chinese, for example, you know that in Italy every year we have 1 million Chinese tourists, and usually they touch base in 3-4 countries, including Milano, where they are going to spend in the fashion district a lot of money on the luxury brands shop. So this is an example how you can build, and we already did it, an experience with Alipay, which is an alternative payments. We implemented it in the POS of the luxury brands shop that are our customers, and we can add ATM transportation, museum visit, you know, building an overall customer experience dedicated to a particular kind of tourists from a country. No? So you can really do a lot of things, analyzing data and building up packages in order to extend the number of days they want to stay in Italy or in Milan, and enable them to, you know, have a good experience also at the Milan Dome if you want to visit in a very star Michelin restaurant or in a luxury brand. So this is the kind of things that technology enable you to do it. No? Before the traveling, during the traveling with geolocalization, and after traveling when they're back at home, because via e-commerce they can buy Italian products or other let's say goods.
We'll keep an eye out for the communication of the next initiatives. Two quick last questions. Are you going to be able to convince German consumers to go to a different way of transacting QR codes? If we're moving contactless, and now you're saying, and now for this it'll be slightly different, and actually educating the consumers and getting them used to it. Do you think that is an issue here?
Well, I think we don't have to educate the people whether they're using QR code-based payments or NFC-based payments. So it's just a transmission technology or protocol. So those wallets, which we have seen in my slides, are supporting NFC payments, for example. But what they're going to do when you are an iOS user, or the wallet is used by an iPhone user, and the payment solution is not from Apple, it's from someone else, then you have to find a way to make sure that this user could pay at a physical POS. And therefore you do have two choices. The first one is you can build your solution based on optical methods, right, QR code based, or you trying to use the NFC interface from an iPhone using the NDEF technology transmission approach. I don't want to go too much into details, but the technical guys will know what I'm talking about. So, and at least it's just let's say the way the consumer wants to pay. So the solutions are there, right? And yes, so I don't think there's any discussion about yes or no, QR code versus NFC and all those kind of things. Look at China. Most of those payment solutions, let's say Apple Pay or WeChat Pay, they are using, for example, QR code-based methods. So, well, because they don't want to buy any terminals, right? NFC terminals. But this will change in the next couple of years because the NFC terminals will be so cheap, or right? So we don't know really.
Interesting to see if they go the NFC way, or we think we simplify our lives with the QR code way.
Yes, well, but maybe the important thing is that when we are talking about an NFC payment or an NFC transaction today, then we are talking about EMVCo standards. That means we do have those payment schemes. We already know them very well, MasterCard, Visa, and Amex, and all those kind of things. If we are talking about QR code payments, then it's, let's say, scheme-free, or it's not owned by those players. Mm-hmm. So it's really the question of different markets, different, let's say, ecosystems and players, and all those things, right?
One last quick question for you. Do you see your way forward for ease and convenience to consumers is packing as much as you can in a mobile app so the consumer virtually doesn't have to get out of his car to pay? Do you see that one as an important pack, or just one other additional benefit and the consumer will choose what he wants?
I think it's a combination. I mean, we want to make it seamless experience and keeping the payment in the background and so on, but we still want the driver to get out of the car and go into the shop and buy a coffee. So we need to be able to communicate with the customer all along the customer journey as well. So
Maybe another important thing from my side. Today we are talking about payment transactions and what kind of fees are based on those different transactions. And tomorrow maybe it's not so important. We believe that a payment transaction will not cost anything, because if, for example, Google knows that Mr. Kilic buys his food products, goes to the grocery, to, for example, Tesco, and then it could be possible, I mean, Google knows this, it could be possible that Google says, well, Ercan, do you want to go to Sainsbury's, for example? And maybe it's a good idea because your products you're buying there, or let's try this supermarket or this grocery. And then the question is, Sainsbury would pay for getting Ercan in his store maybe 1, 2, or 3 euros, because Sainsbury knows when Ercan comes to buy anything in his store, he will, let's say, spend for 100 pounds or euros or whatever. So that means a payment transaction, we're talking about 1 or 2 cents or 20 cents or whatever. It's not so important because the margin is much higher by providing a service where I can, let's say, bring customers to another retailer.
I agree. I mean, I think for the summary is that it's certainly going to be a very interesting future over the next years. And it seems the consumer, the customer, he's definitely the one who's going to win with all of this. Who else is going to win or lose? I suppose we'll see. We overran, but I think it was a very interesting discussion. So thank you. And we're back in here 11:15 for the second part, Omnichannel. Thanks.